All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the deltaDNA webinar series. My name's Isaac. I'm the head of Insight here at deltaDNA, and today we're going to talk about how to integrate Tableau into our database and how to get your data out of our system and into Tableau so you can plot some funky charts. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is just how to connect. So how to connect Tableau to our Vertica database, and then I'll go through some simple examples of how you might want to use it. So the first thing you need to do to set up Tableau is, well, of course you have to buy Tableau, but assuming that you've conquered that step, you'll need to download a special configuration file to connect up to our system. So one of the things that Tableau assumes when you're using it is that it can create all sorts of temporary tables and do sorts of other funky things to your database. And of course, we don't allow that to happen for security reasons. And so you need to set up a special configuration file so that Tableau won't try to do that. It's quite happy to work without setting up all those temporary tables. It's just a kind of thing that it does to try to speed things up. But we don't allow that. So what you have to do is go into the docs site, which I'm showing here. And then if you click on this link here, it says download unzip deltaDNA. This is a configuration file for Tableau. If you open that up and extract that, it needs to go to a particular directory. So on your machine, you'll have in your documents, if you've installed Tableau, you'll have something called your Tableau repository. And in here, you'll see a folder called data sources, and you need to make sure that in this data sources folder, you have this deltaDNA .tdc file. So if you extract it to there, which I already have, so I don't need to do that, and then start Tableau, it will use the special configuration to connect to us. So what the TDC file does is it sets up your Postgres connection inside Tableau to work with our system. If you have other PostgreSQL connections, it will affect those. So if you're connecting to lots of different databases, it's worth having to think about. But you can swap it in and out when you're using our system. So let's go into Tableau and see how this works. So how you actually connect now that you've got the special TDC file in there is to go to PostgreSQL. So as I probably said, our system is actually Vertica, but what we do with direct access is go through a PostgreSQL interface, and that's for lots of reasons. One of them is security, so we don't want, and we don't actually hand out accounts on our core Vertica database to anybody. So what we do is we work through this kind of proxy Postgres interface so that all your data is nice and secure. And it looks like a Postgres interface to the outside world, but actually you're talking Vertica. And when you write your SQL queries, if you try to write PostgreSQL, it sometimes won't work, and you need to use actual Vertica SQL queries. So let's show how you connect. So it's very simple. You just click PostgreSQL, and then you type in the server. The server is data.deltaDNA.net. The database will be whatever your account and your game is called. So in this case, DemoCo is the account and Delta Crunch is the game. This combination of account and game will be what you see. It'll be in your path when you're on deltaDNA system. You'll see in the top when you say on the measure screens or any other screens, you'll see part of the path will be your account and your game name. Okay, put the username in here. So this will be whatever your username is, or the email you've used as your username for deltaDNA. We'll put in our magic password and connect. And so now Tableau will go off and try and figure out how to connect to our database. And you see that's very, very quick. And what that brings up is this screen, which is the Tableau data source screen. And so you hear, and for people who have used direct access before, they'll recognize that you have access to these four tables. So you have your events in dev and live, and you have the user metrics in dev and live. Now at this point, I'd ask you to resist the urge to drag these tables into here. Despite the fact that it says drag tables here, you probably shouldn't do that, and there's a number of reasons why. One of the reasons is that potentially you have a lot of data in events. A typical game might have tens of millions of rows of events, in this table. And so really by dragging them in here, what you're saying to Tableau is, oh yes, please go and download 50 million rows of data, which is probably not great. Well, it's not great for it's not such a big problem for our database, but it's probably not great if you're running this on, your laptop in the office or a normal desktop PC, because that's a lot of data, and Tableau is not really designed to deal with millions and millions of rows of data. I mean, the other thing too is that Tableau, you find that Tableau will be quite slow working on these large tables. It's also not really designed to work with data which is structured like our data. So the way that your wide table or events table data is structured, it has lots of missing values. So what, I talked about this last week in the direct access webinar, but the data structure is that for every event we've ever seen, you'll have every parameter, and so it's a very wide table with hundreds of columns. Of course, you don't send every parameter on every event, and so there's lots of null values, and Tableau doesn't really know how to handle those very well. So the secret to using Tableau is to write a query which reduces your data down into some aggregates which are useful. And so actually the first step here is not to actually use Tableau, but actually go back to dbeaver. So here we are in dbeaver, and the idea here is that we want to spec out a query which gives us some nice aggregates that we can use in Tableau. And so we're working on the Delta Crunch example game, so let's just have a look at some simple aggregate query we can do against Delta Crunch, which will bring out some simple numbers for users. So first of all, we need to decide what level we want to aggregate on. So the best way for Tableau is to aggregate at least at user level, so you have one row of metrics per user. It's also quite useful to have it by date, so let's aggregate by the event date. We also want to be able to cohort players by when they started, so let's have the UGA user start date in there. We'll do these in a more normal convention. Oops. Okay. The other thing we probably definitely want is to know how many days it's been since install. So let's chuck in the days since install by simply comparing the user start date to the event date. We'll call that days since install. And then let's put in some aggregates that we want to measure about the user. So let's say, let's see how many missions they've done. So that will give us a number of missions per day, because we're going to do a group by event date eventually. Let's have a look at what the user level was, so we can have max user level. Let's see how many transactions they've done. And we'll make sure that they're real money by putting product category in here. I don't want to do it that way. I want to do it with an over. So for people who are not super SQL experts, what I'm doing here, this sum over is, whoops, I don't want to do it that way actually, but what I'm doing is giving myself the ability to put a counter on how many in-app purchases there are. So what this will do now is it will count up the number of in-app purchases that happened on each day, and so then on each day I'll have the number which has occurred by that day, so 0, 1, 2, 3. And let's finally put in just the amount that people spent. Okay, so now I have a couple of metrics that I'm going to get for every user on every day. Make sure I put my group bys in here. And really, this is the kind of shape of data that Tableau works well with. So we were going to reduce the number of rows down substantially because we're now, instead of having every single event for a user, we're going to just have every one row per user per day. And none of the values are going to be empty. They're always going to be populated. And so this is going to allow Tableau to be looking at a user level, some user level metrics, and it can then do aggregates at a game level. So it can start to show us distributions of how these numbers work across users. User level, so let's just see if this works. Probably done something wrong. Not connected. That's probably not going to help. Probably should have put a limit on this just so it doesn't explode. It's a bit late now, but anyway. So here we go. So here are our aggregates we've just produced. So we've got our user IDs, the date that the aggregate occurs on, what their install date is, how many days it is since the install for that user, how many missions they did on that day, what their user level was on that day, what's the total purchase count to that point, and how much they spent on that day. The other thing we probably want to do in here, which is a good idea when you do this kind of analysis against our events, is to make sure that the user installed this month, because of course the events table only has 31 days of data. And so it's not fair to look at people where we can't see the beginning of their gameplay, potentially. I mean, it depends on what you're trying to do. But so let's just pull out the players who started this month. That'll also make the volume of data a bit smaller. Okay, so let's test if that works. Okay, cool. So our query works. Let's chuck it in Tableau. So if we take our query, I mean, you can use the SQL query builder in Tableau. You don't have to go to dbeaver. The main reason I did it in dbeaver is that it has this nice syntax highlighting. You can easily go here and look at what the columns on the table are and things like that. Because the SQL query builder in Tableau is not very friendly. So if we go in here, you just paste SQL and it doesn't have any syntax highlighting, doesn't have any sort of helper methods around it. You just have this sort of plain text SQL. So sometimes it's quite hard to see why things aren't working. And so it's much better to build your query in a different tool like dbeaver, test if it works, and then put it into Tableau. So we've got our SQL. So we just paste it in there and press OK. And now we can go to the worksheet and start to build some charts we might be interested in. So let's go to sheet 1. So you can see here that all the aggregates that we made in our query are now all sitting down here as measures. So Tableau has this concept of dimensions and measures, which is quite similar to our slice and dice actually. The one thing that Tableau can do, which say our slice and, well, there's lots of things that Tableau can do that our slice and dice can't do. But what it does allow you is to easily move between these two. So we have day since install here. Tableau thinks that's a measure. Actually, we probably think of more a dimension, so I can just drag it up here into the dimensions, and now it's a dimension. So now I can easily use a day since install as a dimension against, say, some measures. And in fact, most of these things are actually things that we want to use as measures, so we'll just drag them all up into there. The kind of measures we want are probably more like the count of the users. In fact, count distinct user ID is probably the first measure we'll use. So let's start to build some charts. So let's try to build a retention chart. So retention is going to be day since install, so we just drag the day since install up into the columns, and then we can just do the count of unique users. And voila, there we go. We have essentially retention. If we want to have it as a percentage, we can just put look at this count of distinct user IDs here, go down to the quick table calculation and do a % of total, and then we see we now have the percentage retention on each day. What happens is that when you drag and drop stuff into Tableau, it will automatically go off and run the queries that it needs to supply that data. which is good. You don't have to do anything. It's now got the SQL it needs to get the data out of our database, and it's just piping it through as it needs it. So the thing that Tableau is really good for is it can really, really quickly build these kind of charts, much quicker than any other way you might access the data. And so now we have our, 1 to 30-day retention. We can call the sheet retention. The other things that you might want to do with this, of course, are you might want to filter it down into particular cohorts. So let's put the user date into the filters. It'll then ask us what dates do we want to filter on. So we say we want to use a range of dates. It will then go off and ask the database what dates are possible. And here you can see it's returned the last month. So, maybe it's not reasonable to look at the retention of people that played today, of course. So let's look at, say, a week at the beginning of the month. So something like that. We can apply that, and then it'll go and update the chart to reflect that. So given that we've built these metrics against the events data, we probably want to use these filters like user start date and other things across multiple worksheets. And of course, you don't want to have to drag this thing in every single time. So what you can do is click this and say apply to worksheets, and all using this data source. And now every time we start a new worksheet, it will only use those users that we put into this filter. And we can put a quick filter, as it's called in Tableau, up here, which appears in the top right, where we can now start to filter very quickly by start date. So we can very, very quickly change the user cohort that we want to look at. So that's building a retention chart. Let's build a new workbook. So if you want to start a new chart, you can click here down on new worksheet. So let's look at the time to first payment, since we have in-app purchase number and so on here. So let's do time to first payment in days. So we'll drag days to install into the columns again. You can see that now that it knows we're using this data source, it automatically puts the start date into the filters. We want to know the first purchase. So let's have an in-app purchase number filter equal to 1. We want to know when the first purchase happened. And then we can just do account distinct again. And so here we have, very, very quickly again, the distribution in days since installed to the first purchase. And again, you can really quickly, you can put a quick filter on here to very quickly jump between different purchase numbers. So that was the first purchase, this is the second purchase. So let's call this our days to first purchase chart. So you can already see the power of Tableau here, that we're really quickly building up charts that would be quite time consuming to build in any other way. And we've done it very simply by just getting the data into very rough kind of shape in terms of what level we want to aggregate at and what the aggregates are, and then just dumping it into Tableau, and then we can just drag and drop and get everything right. To kind of re-emphasize the point from before, if you were to use the data in its original raw shape, which is all the different event names and all the different fields, it would be very slow, but it'd also be quite time consuming to get Tableau to get the actual chart out, because of course Tableau is doing the hard work aggregating, not our massive Vertica database. So again, I'd really strongly advise you to think carefully about how you're transforming the data to get into Tableau, because Tableau is not a high performance computing application, whereas our Vertica database arguably is. And so you're much better off putting the load on our Vertica cluster than you are on your laptop running Tableau. But I'll stop harping on about that now. Okay, so there's our days since install. Let's make it days first purchase. Actually, make it the first purchase. There we go. Okay, so let's do another one that shows off a bit more of how to do the different features in Tableau. One thing I was going to say when I was looking at this is that what can happen, when we were clicking these quick filters is potentially, they can be quite slow in coming back, because it has to run the SQL sometimes to actually update it, and so you can see it's quite slow. If you're working against a really, really big data set, that can become a bit annoying. And so what you can do is you can adjust Tableau to turn auto updates off. So with these two things ticked on, what it's doing is, the first one, it's auto updating the worksheet whenever you modify anything. So when you move these things around, it auto updates. The other thing it can update on is the quick filters. So the things on the right here, when you touch them, they'll update. Yes. So I've had someone say if you create an extract, it won't be slow anymore, but the problem with having extract, of course, is that then you're stuck with a static view of the data. So if you're working in a single session, that's fine. But sometimes, quite often, especially when you're building dashboards, you might want it to be looking at the live system. But anyway, so your options are, one of them you can create an extract for that session and it'll be quite quick. The other thing you can do is you can turn these auto updates on and off depending on your preference. If you turn them off, then you can run updates by doing it here. So if I turn the auto update off, I can start to play with these guys and they won't do anything. Oop, I didn't do the right one. I shouldn't do that. Anyway, and then if you want to update it, it'll update. You can click update and it'll update. But let's turn the auto updates on because we're not working with massive piles of data for this session. Okay, so let's make another chart. So let's make a percent spending per user, which will show off some of the things, other ways you can use Tableau. So what we want to do now, because we want to know what the percentage spending per, say, day since install again is. We don't have a flag here for who's a spender and who's not, so we need to create one. So we've got an in-app purchase number. So what we want to do is convert that into a flag. So let's make a calculated field from this. Okay, so we can call this a payer flag. And so this is starting to show the real power of Tableau here in that you can actually convert the data inside Tableau into other things. It's not just stuck plotting whatever you pass to it. You can manipulate the fields that you give it to change them into many different things. So here we're just going to do a case statement again. So what you're going to say is that case when, oh, I need to put this thing here, don't I? And then when it's 0, then 0 else 1. I think that's right. There we go. It'll tell me it's valid. So Tableau is quite friendly in these, and it tells you what they're valid. You can also go and you can search which functions you can use, and you can see here. So we can bring up the help for case quite quickly. There are loads of different calculated fields you can do. They tend to be quite similar to what you can do in SQL. So in fact, the syntax tends to be similar as well. So it's count distinct. There's parts of dates. You can do lots of date manipulation. You can do if then else's and case statements. There is even the ability to write essentially raw SQL into the calculated field box, and then it'll try to do that SQL expression against the data that it has. You can also pipe the data into R and do any sort of R calculations you like. Although I mean, I must admit at that point, my preference would be to use R as a standalone thing, but you can use the features of R if you need to inside Tableau. So we've got our payer flag, so let's go OK. Now what we're going to do to work out, so we want to look at the average number, the payer fraction as a function of day since install. So we have our payer flag here. If we just drag this up and then convert this to an average. So when you're doing measures, you can convert the measure into different aggregates by clicking on the arrow and then going down and looking at the different things you have available. So if we turn this into an average now, what we'll actually have is the payer fraction on each of these days. Of course, because if you're not a payer, you're a 0, and if you are a payer, you're a 1. This is binning by these days, so when you take an average, you get the payer fraction. So now we have a really, really cool plot, which is just telling us of all the people that are active on these different days, what fraction of people were payers. And you can see for Delta Crunch that there's a massive number of payers after 30 days, which may be more to do with my unrealistic event simulation than anything else. The cool thing about Tableau is that it's really dynamic. So say we were looking at DataSynth install, but say we quickly decide that actually DataSynth install is not the interesting thing. Maybe user level is interesting, and you can imagine user level being interesting in this case. So we can really quickly switch that to user level, and we can see, okay, 100% of people are payers by level 12, 13 in Delta Crunch. Cool. Okay, so that's how you build calculated fields in Tableau. Let's give this a name as well. So we're going to call that percent spenders or payers by level. Okay, so let's build one final worksheet just to show you the different kind of visualization options that you have. So here, the default thing here is we've just done a very simple bar chart of what we're interested in. You can actually change, when in this style chart, you can change what the mark looks like by clicking on this marks selector. So here's a bar. We can easily convert that into a line if we like. We can convert it into an area chart. We can just have some circles. These marks become more interesting when you start to do some filtering. So if you drag any of these other dimensions into here, so I'm just trying to think of one which would be useful at this point. Maybe total spent. Will that give us something interesting? See what it does. Oh, okay. Well, it's decided that it's going to do something else. But anyway, when you drag these dimensions into these, you can start to change the plot by breaking it down into sort of stacked color bars by this, or you can use the size instead of the color, and so on and so forth. But let's get rid of that and go back to what we had before, which is potentially more meaningful. Let's make it a line just for fun. Okay, so let's look at one more option. So what we're doing now is I'm going to build what we call monetization matrix, which is just the number of in-app purchases versus how much people have spent. So let's grab the in-app purchase number. Let's grab the total spent. So now we're not looking at any aggregate, so we're not looking at any measures in terms of Tableau. What we're trying to do is build a table of how often things happen. I guess the aggregate we're going to use is going to be, oh, why don't you do this? Okay, we have to do something, which is this. Okay, we're going to build a table which shows us how often people spend a certain amount on a certain purchase number. This is a bit messy, so let's filter out all the non-spenders. So we'll chuck, let's not do it that way, let's do it this way. So let's get rid of all the people who don't spend anything. Okay, and so now we've got a table which is telling us for each purchase number how much that purchase was worth, or how many people on that purchase number spent that amount. So here, 89 people, their first purchase was 99 cents. 31 people, their first purchase was $9.99. This is a bit ugly, so let's make it look a bit nicer. So we can put a heat map essentially under it by, so I should point out, sorry, that this show me bar allows you to choose different visualization options. What it does is it tries to figure out based on what variables you're using up here in your columns and rows, what's possible, and it won't let you plot things which it doesn't think are possible. In fact, it tries to tell you what you need to do to get that. So if I wanted a pie chart, I should have a dimension and one or more measures, or one or two measures. I have two dimensions, and so, well, I have one or more measures. I have a measure which is user ID, count user ID, and I have a dimension which is, or one or more dimensions, and so I want to plot a table. So we've got a highlight table at the moment. We can look at what they call a heat map, which is a size type thing. So here we now have, instead of the numbers, we have symbols which represent the size of the cohort which populates that cell. And when you hover over it, tells you the numbers. So here again, you can see that 89 people, their first purchase was a 99-cent package. Let's go back to our highlight table because that's a bit more useful. Cool. So we've got, let's call that something, let's call it monetization matrix. So we've got some simple examples of how you can quickly get results by combining Tableau and our system. As I kind of pointed out before, the speed with which I'm able to produce these charts is both a function of Tableau, and it's kind of nice, easy to use functionality, but also the way that I aggregated the data into the custom SQL which I used against this. And of course, if I wanted to, I can always go back to my SQL and I can add another dimension, right? So say if I decide that I also want to have, I don't know, what can I put in here? Let's say what the last mission number was or something. So we can do a max of the mission ID. Okay, if I want to add any measure, any metrics or aggregates, I can just chuck them in like that and press OK, and it'll go off and grab them. And then I can go back to any of my charts, and all of a sudden I'll have this last mission field in here, which I can use in any of the workbooks that I've been creating. So you can really quickly iterate to build up what you want. You can start with quite a simple query and then build up the different metrics you might want or change the shape of it slightly to get exactly what you need out of our database. So the final thing I'm going to show you is how to build a dashboard. So one of the cool things that Tableau lets you do is once you've built, you've done all the hard work building all these charts, you can build a dashboard. So you can, if you press down, so in the bottom bar here, which probably you missed out before, you can make a worksheet like this, or you can make a dashboard like that. You can also make dashboards by clicking the dashboard selector up here at the top. And then you can just drag and drop any of the charts you've been working on. So let's just drag all these in. And you can see that, there's some functionality here which allows me to position them intelligently. So let's just put these on a nice 4x4 grid. So there's my payer one. And there's my matrix. Drop that down there. And so you can see you can really, really quickly build up a custom dashboard. I know we have a custom dashboard tool within our system, but there's some limitations to what you can achieve with slice and dice and funnels. And if you really, really need to have some very specific figures on your dashboard, you can easily do it in Tableau and set it up like this. And of course, you can set that to be full screen, and then even in full screen mode, you can still use the quick filters, which will apply to any of the charts that they're set up against. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. This is a very quick and dirty introduction to Tableau. Tableau can do a lot more than what I've shown today. In fact, we could run a whole webinar series on how to use Tableau, but what I've been trying to do is just to show you how to really quickly get up to speed with Tableau and what's the best way to use it against the data that you have stored in our system. As I said before, the natural way that we organize your data in our database is not a format which Tableau is particularly set up for, and so you have to transform it via SQL to get it in the shape which Tableau is really good at working against. So like I said, I'll stop there and take any questions.
Somebody was asking if we'd be able to share the TBX file of the example that you were running, Isaac.
Yes, I'll have to think about how to get rid of obviously because it has my login details into deltaDNA, which I can't send out. But
good point.
Yes, I'll find some way of putting it up without that. You'll have to, when you connect, one thing I'll show this because maybe people haven't seen this. So let's save this one. Let's save this as I'll just override that one. Okay, if I now close that, open up Tableau again, if I click on this, it will ask me if I want to connect the custom SQL. Of course I do, and it'll ask me for my login details. So what I'll do is I'll remove this username from the workbook. I'll put a dummy one in, and then we can distribute this. And you can connect to this workbook because everyone has access to the Delta Crunch game. So you can just put your deltaDNA account in here, and it should connect. And then you can just connect to this example Tableau workbook. Yes, we'll also share the SQL query that goes into it. Cool. And hopefully lots of you will be trying out stuff with Tableau. If you do run into any problems, feel free to send something to support, and we'll try and help you as much as we can, because I think this is a really good way to use our direct access system, and it'd be really great if more and more people were doing it. So, okay, cool. Thanks everyone for attending, and
Thanks, Isaac.
yeah, okay, cheers.
Cheers. Bye. Bye.